For years now, we've all been struggling with the blackouts, haven't we? So now there's a new electricity bill that has been tabled in Parliament. Here is what it is set to do. It's to pave the way to create a new transmission company. Now remember, essentially, that Eskom works in three categories. It is the distribution, it is the transmission, also it is the generation of electricity. So let's talk about the transmission part of this. Parliament's Energy Committee will soon be asking for the public's input on the matter. But what does this really involve you? In which way does it involve you? Let's hear from energy expert Mohamed Madhi, always very kind and gracious with his time. Mohamed, good to have you back with us. Am I correct in saying that really what we're trying to deal with here is one part of the Eskom tripod when it comes to generation, distribution and transmission? What do you make of this electricity bill? Good morning.
Morning, Gareth, and morning to the viewers. You're quite right. It is one key component of Eskom's three primary areas: distribution, transmission, and generation. It's actually a very important step, something that has been, in the works for over 25 years. I remember a long time ago when I was at Eskom in the late 90s, we had something called the REDS, Regional Electricity Distribution Zones. And those were supposed to be enacted, over 20 years ago. And we've had various iterations of this over the years. This time we've actually got a bill that is being tabled, hopefully. I think it is a critical step. It's actually a very necessary step. It's pointless saying too late, better late than never. And certainly one that can help pave the way to a much more efficient overall electricity energy delivery system.
This company that they're talking about, Mohamed, that is going to get this transmission contract, transmission tender, be responsible for the transmission, this company, is it going to be a subsidiary of Eskom, to your understanding, or can it be a completely separate company? It can be a privately owned company. How would this work? How do they get control of transmission away from Eskom?
Look, it will never be completely away from Eskom, and it is the one part of the electricity infrastructure that we don't necessarily want away from Eskom. Transmission is a critical aspect in terms of connecting distribution users and the generation capacity. And it's clearly something that Eskom is actually very competent and very good at, and has been over a long period of time, notwithstanding the fact that grid strengthening and the actual upgrade of the infrastructure has not happened the way it should have happened. But in terms of controlling that and being able to operate the transmission network the way it should, Eskom, I think, has sufficient competency to do that. So this will be an entity most likely that is under the control of Eskom. But what we should have is completely independent generation and distribution components of the electricity infrastructure. So that's most likely how this will play out.
On the company itself, because we know the financial constraints that Eskom is under at the moment, when municipalities, Mohamed, aren't paying them, they're forced to turn off their lights because they don't have enough money to keep their transformers maintained, etc. So there's huge money issues at Eskom. I can't help but wonder if a new company comes in to handle the transmission side of this, that company is not going to do that for free. Do you think we could see a scenario where us as consumers are now going to get another jump in electricity prices because now we have to pay for a new company to come in and do what Eskom is not able to do properly?
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and undoubtedly that's most likely to happen. So what will happen under cover of the new company is probably a significant jump in transmission prices. The cost to transmit 4 generators from the point of power generation plants to the end user. And of course, the transmission network sits in between. There is currently a cost to that, but that cost is probably not going to be sufficient, in fact, is not sufficient to cater for the upgrades and the maintenance and the normal operation of the transmission system as it needs to be operated. So quite right, there will probably be a jump. What we then hope is competition between generators is such that it reduces the input price. And overall, that has some sort of buffering effect on the actual price that distributors and end users will pay. So remember, we'll have the transmission component in between, but we'll also, over time, have a little bit more choice in terms of the choice of generator. And that will introduce some form of competition, which, again, hopefully reduces prices over time.
I might be asking a stupid question here, Mohamed, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This is why I've got you, the expert, to bail me out when I get this horribly wrong. But where is there a company in South Africa that can just pick this up and run with it? Surely a company like this doesn't exist, or am I wrong? I mean, we're talking about the transmission stage of our national grid. What company is big enough to just pick up and try and run with it?
No, so you're quite right. There isn't any entity right now that is able to do this. It would have to be a combination of the competence and expertise that sits within Eskom and some private sector expertise. So and that company, that new entity, will have to operate this. Remember, within the idea is also that within Eskom, you already have well-defined areas: transmission, distribution, and generation. So the bulk of that competence, the bulk of the people, the bulk of the infrastructure will come from that transmission component of Eskom. How the actual structure eventually is executed or brought into existence with the help of the private sector still needs to be seen.
I suppose apart from the money side, the how much question and the who is going to do this, what do you imagine is the timeline on something like this? Or are we going to start talking about maybe this decade?
Yeah, unfortunately, again, just given the history, if one looks at history as an indicator, this has been in the works for over 25 years. But we have a lot more pressures than we've had in the past, and a lot more dire situation with regard to the overall electricity infrastructure. So hopefully that is a spur to speed this process up. I anticipate it to take anywhere between 2 and 5 years to have this completely bedded down.
Mohamed, very briefly, as I say goodbye to you, I want to ask you this. It's our viewer question this morning because everyone knows that you were involved in Eskom back in the 90s, thereabouts, if memory serves me correctly as well. Thabo Mbeki, the former president, there it is, thank you team, there's our viewer question, suggesting BEE has had a negative impact on the load shedding and blackouts in the country. Just wanted to get your thoughts. You agree or disagree with the former president?
I wouldn't completely agree. I think, look, fundamentally, we have an aging infrastructure and we have maintenance that was not carried out properly, and we have corruption. So those are the three fundamental factors that led to load shedding: aging infrastructure, lack of proper maintenance, and corruption. And those are intertwined, of course. Those were the reasons that we sit in the crisis that we do today.